Herzlich willkommen zum 36. DocFest München. A very warm welcome to the 36th DocFest Munich, this year as our online edition DocFest at Home 2021 from the Silbersaal in the Deutsches Theater, one of our usual locations. My name is Daniel Lang and I'm going to be your host for the Doc Live Film Talk tonight. I have a co-host with me here, Vincent Puchner. Hello, Vincent. And you, the audience, can ask live questions via our chat. So please send questions you have to Vincent. The film we're going to talk about is called There's No Place Like This Place Any Place by director and cinematographer Lulu Wei. It's the German premiere of the film. The film is being shown in our section Doc Guest, and our guest this year is Canada, with 7 films showing the diverse range of filmmaking in Canada. And I'd like to welcome the filmmaker Lulu Wei now. Hello, Lulu.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Where are you at the moment? You're at your background is Honest Ed's, but where are you?
I'm actually still living in the apartment that we moved into in the film, and still living here and currently in my dining room, but I figured this was a nicer background.
It's lovely, it's perfect. You used to live on the block of Honest Ed's. Could you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the film? When did you actually decide, wow, I'm going to make a film, and then I'm going to make a feature film?
It was definitely like a evolution. I think at first, my girlfriend and I were living there, and we were noticing a lot of things changing. And she was actually the one who was like, "Oh, why don't you film some of it? Because it's not going to be like this, you know, in a while." And then I was like, "Oh yeah, I should just start documenting the changes that are happening, and partially documenting the amazing places that were there, especially on Markham Street." And so I started just shooting in my spare time. I was working full time in advertising, and so it was just like whenever I had time, I would just take a camera. If I could like get one for another shoot that I was using, I would just take it home, and then I would just start filming. And then eventually I realized, you know, there was like a story here that I wanted to tell. And then when it actually was affecting us, that's when I was like, okay, this is like a bigger story. And then I decided I would try and make it into a feature film.
Mm-hmm. But there was sort of, when was this in the filming process? Was like, because you filmed over a number of years.
Yeah, so I think, I worked on it for like about 4 years, and so we definitely filmed like for at least 3.5. And I think maybe it was like half a year into 7 months, 8 months into it, that I was like, okay, this is like, could be a thing. And I ended up applying to a bunch of talent labs, which I got into, and that sort of helped me figure out the story more and pitch it. And then when I figured out I could get interest and maybe pitch it in different places and it could get funding, then I was like, okay, this can be a project people believe in.
You explore the wider impact of gentrification in the film. And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about sort of the development of your ideas, because I'm pretty sure right at the beginning you weren't thinking about, okay, this is going to be about gentrification and its broader implications, and I need this character and this character. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I really did not know that I was going to be making a film sort of about, I guess, gentrification and the redevelopment. I think at first I really almost wanted to make like a time capsule of all the things like that existed on the block, because I thought it was like such a special street, and Honest Ed's was really special and it meant a lot for people in the city. And so I just wanted to document it so that it would exist in the future for other people to see it. I think I was like walking one day and someone was like walking with their child and they were like, oh yeah, like this was here and this was here, kind of thing to them. And then I'm like, oh, right, like for people in the future, they'll never know like what was here or get to see that. And so that's why I sort of started and what my goal was. And then I think eventually I realized, like a lot of different forces were at play. And, being someone who lives in Toronto, we always have, cranes up. There's always buildings that are going to be redeveloped into condos. And so I think eventually I just realized that it was a bigger story and it was affecting me personally. But I think what was difficult about telling the story was how my thoughts around everything changed a lot. It's a really complex issue because it's like we want to preserve all these spaces, but at the same time, we need places for people to live. And so it's just like this battle between like who gets to decide what we can keep and how do we keep things, but still have affordable housing. And so that was a learning process through all of that.
This dilemma of like wanting to preserve neighborhoods on the one side and having to develop neighborhoods on the other side because a city like Toronto is booming. What are your views, your personal views about that? Like, how do you feel about that now after making this film?
I mean, I'm still really sad about like the loss of neighborhoods. And I think that if the places that we're going in would actually be affordable, then maybe I would feel differently. And I'm just talking about affordable based on like the numbers I was given and how you break that down, which I break down into in the film to being $2,000 a month. And that's based on the median income of $80,000 a month. So I'm like, oh, for anyone making less than that, that means you can't afford to live in these buildings. So I'm like, that's not really affordable rent. And I really wish that it had been a bit more affordable. And then maybe it would have not felt so bad about the trade-off kind of thing. And I think also, you wonder a bit like the precedent it sets. But I will say, compared to a lot of other developments, it is one of the better developments in the city.
And I guess the housing crisis in Toronto is still ongoing, so it's not changed. But I was wondering, has COVID and the pandemic changed the situation or worsened the situation, or what's the situation like now?
I mean, I think that, there's like different news outlets that are like, oh, Toronto's becoming more affordable because everyone's moving out of the city because, it's expensive to live here and it's small apartments and stuff. But I haven't really found that to be the case. Like I have seen apartments come on like when I'm searching or something, and when friends have been searching, like they have found cheaper apartments than what they normally would be, but I don't think they're that much cheaper and there's not that many of them. I think if you want to live in a condo, there's like tons of them available now and they actually have become a lot cheaper. But the housing prices to actually buy here just keep going up. And I'm like, I don't understand who can afford to buy these houses. It's like always a joke that, like if you want if you want to buy a house here, you're going to find a tiny like house and it's going to be over $1 million kind of thing. So I really don't know how people can afford to buy houses in Toronto.
Your film, or the story you tell in the film, could easily have been sort of a David versus Goliath story, which it isn't. You show like the different players, the different aspects, different voices. When did you decide, okay, I'm going to make the film like this, I'm going to tell the story like this?
I think it was partially an evolution of just sort of like when I was learning about stuff, I realized, it's like a very complex issue and I wanted to do something different because a lot of gentrification films, it's like sort of us versus them kind of thing. And in a way, like there weren't that many people living in the block as well. So I think it was just sort of an evolution. And I also just wanted people to sort of make up their own minds and like hear from the different I guess, voices. But I think in a way, like everyone can infer their own biases or feelings on it. And I think that depending on who I've talked to, everyone's got a different read on the film kind of thing, which I find is really interesting because I'm like, yeah, I portrayed people a certain way and like let them speak for themselves, but then different people infer different things on that kind of thing.
While watching the film, I was getting, I don't know, more and more mad at the West Bank, the young guy, the developer basically, who was telling you or us, the audience, how wonderful everything was going to be. And I sort of missed like a voice of dissent. Like the only time I think somebody sort of is really angry at him is at one of the community meetings, and someone yells something that it's basically, no, you're not telling the truth. And I think sort of, yeah, were there voices of dissent and people that were really angry, or was it just not the case and you didn't film them?
I mean, I think at the community meetings, there's like definitely voices of being upset, and like, I mean, I was living there. I was upset when it was happening. And I don't want to see like spaces get redeveloped that, you know, hold a special place in our hearts. At the same time, I'm like, okay, I understand that housing needs to be built. But I guess I was just, I guess like with Deb, I was hoping that people would realize that like, maybe this isn't all that it's cracked up to be kind of thing with what she's saying. And also, I guess I was hoping people would read more into like the subtext or just like the undertones of everything. And yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, like we have a politician who is actually a really great politician in the city. And you know, he like says his piece, but I think what I was trying to counter everything with was like, you know, Gabor and Aita, and just like this idea that this place meant a lot to someone, and like now it doesn't exist for them. And I was hoping that, you know, like people can sort of make up their own minds based on that kind of thing.
Was it difficult to get your protagonists on board, like, and get access, for example, to West Bank? Did they need convincing, or was it easy?
Well, they were technically my landlords for a few months, and I sort of, I mean, I was just kind of like, I've been filming, I'd like to keep filming, and I was kind of like, let me know if anything is happening kind of thing. And I realized, you know, maybe being sort of like a person who like maybe looks younger is like BIPOC, like a person of color, not a man. Maybe I'm more unassuming. And so, you know, it's like, I don't know what you're making, but it's probably not going to be anything. So sure, go ahead kind of thing. I mean, I think I was always like truthful in how I said that I just wanted to document, you know, the change of the block and the redevelopment. And so that I was able to get access that way.
And what about the other people in your film, like the people living on the block? How did you get in touch with them? Did you know them before filming, or?
Well, I had been sort of like trying to go to a lot of these places before I knew they were closing. And I had met, like, I actually interviewed and met like a lot of people on the street, and then we didn't end up being able to use it because, you know, we already had a lot of characters. And that was like a learning process for me as well. And working with my producer to try and narrow in on a few stories. And yeah, so Gabor was amazing. He is like such a nice person, and I feel like we actually really got along, and I saw a lot of like similarities in myself with Gabor, and just like his drive to create. Like he's 86 now, and he would just tell me that he felt bad that he wasn't going to the studio when he had to move to a different place. And I was like, Gabor, you're like, well, I think he was like 84, 85 at that point. And I was like, you're in your mid 80s. You don't need to feel bad or guilty that you're not creating things anymore. But he just had this drive to make things, and he's a really social person and just like loved talking to people. And I just found his story so interesting. And I feel like, you know, talking to other people who've watched the film, there's not enough depictions of maybe older folks who are still making art or like still driven to do that. And so it was really great to get to connect with him. And during the pandemic, like when it's warmer out, like my producer and I went to go visit him, and we brought him lunch from his like favorite place that was in the block. And then we had lunch with him, and it's been nice to see him. And Kathleen actually bought one of his paintings for her mom's birthday. And so that was like really nice. And yeah, and with like Aita, I mean, she's just like doing such an amazing thing for her community. And I'm really glad to be able to show that. And yeah, like I still talk to Aita, and we had like a little Zoom screening with some of her community and a bunch of these folks who are part of like the seniors group that used to meet at a different book list, not during the pandemic, like every Monday. They're all people who grew up in the block, because beside the block, there used to be, there is a school, and before the school existed and a field existed there, it was all this like housing, and a lot of Black folks like lived in that community. And then once the school came, they all had to move. And so I think a lot of them meet now, and then they like talk about like, you know, the history of living there and stuff. And they got to see the film, which is nice. And some of them like were in the time capsule scene in the film. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to be still like connected to that community, and hoping that, you know, when they get to move to the space of like my old apartment, that we can like screen the film in my old apartment, which will be fun.
So they haven't moved yet?
No, they haven't moved yet. They're still renovating. I think there's like a lot to be done construction-wise, and I think they're still fundraising for some of those renovations to move over. Okay.
Vincent, have we got any questions from our audience?
So we have one question from the audience. So did your relationship to the project change from the beginning to the end, to the day, or is it still like you're against the project? And yes, so did it change the?
Oh, like the development.
Yeah, the development. Yeah.
I think that, you know, I've had mixed emotions and feelings throughout, and I think it's always hard to figure out like what the answer should be on how to create more affordable housing. And, you know, like I think in the film I was struggling to try and find that answer, and I never did find it. I mean, I think the film ends on a bit of like a question, and I think to this day a lot of people are still struggling to find that answer. And I realize, you know, if urban planners who've been working on this for years can't figure it out, or haven't sort of figured it out or implemented it, then I'm not gonna figure it out either. But I still have like mixed emotions about it. Obviously, like I really miss the block, and it does feel really sad to like walk by that block, because I don't know, you know, like what having this development, like the precedents it'll set, and like sort of the ripple effect that it'll create in the neighborhood. And it does feel like a piece of the city did disappear. But at the same time, like as David Mirvish says in the film, you know, people stopped going to the store, and it became sort of like this museum relic that people would go to for entertainment or nostalgia kind of thing. And I think part of the reason is a lot of the immigrants and folks who could afford to live downtown Toronto actually were like had to move out. And so, you know, maybe it wasn't as accessible to go to Honest Ed's anymore. And then you have like online shopping and like Walmart and the dollar stores and all that. So I think in a way, you know, like maybe the space was being underused in certain aspects, but I think that maybe they could have done more to actually like make affordable housing, and also to make affordable studio spaces, because most of those artists on the street like paid a very subsidized amount of rent, and I'm not sure if that's going to happen, and I don't predict that. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm sure it was a very expensive build, and they probably would like to make their investment back. So,
you just sort of touched it in your answer, but Honest Ed's seems to be like a treasure trove for many Torontonians, like as a place of nostalgia. What did Honest Ed's mean to you? Like, what are the memories that you have of going into Honest Ed's?
Well, I think making this film was kind of daunting in that Honest Ed's holds such a special place in like so many people's hearts, and like not even people from Toronto, but people I think across Canada who've been to it, and like the Mirvishes have a big like artistic legacy in Toronto and are well known. And I think for me, I have a different relationship to it in the sense that like I didn't grow up in Toronto. I moved here in 2009. And so like I've been here for a while, like a long time, but I didn't grow up here, and so I don't have the same memories as a lot of folks who had like their immigrant family members who got like their first pan or like their first winter coat and like all that stuff at Honest Ed's. And so like for me, I remember, you know, like being a student moving here and like buying all these things for like quite cheap to like furnish my home and my apartment, and also like getting groceries from there sometimes. And like I'd get all of my summer hats and like winter hats and gloves and like a lot of different stuff, and you find like really fun things in there. And so I definitely like shopped there, but I don't necessarily have that same, I guess, connection as some folks in Toronto do, but I still feel like it was such a needed place, and getting to hear other people's stories, you know, like it was a really magical place, and it was fun to just go there and get lost in it.
I laughed out loud when I saw the scene of the people getting married in the car park. I just thought, yeah, it's just extremely bizarre, but also very funny. You use quite a bit of sort of archival footage in the film, also a lot of archival footage of Honest Ed's. Was that difficult to access, or was there a lot? Maybe you can talk about these aspects.
Well, it's actually a funny story because a lot of like the black and white archival that's in the film, it was actually shot as a student film in 1975 by my producer's dad. But I didn't actually know that. Like when we had met, I had no clue that her dad shot that, and like we had met through a mutual friend, and I was just working on this project alone, and I was kind of burnt out. And she was like, "Oh, I just want to help you get it made because I hope and that someone is making it," kind of thing. And so like we were working on it, and then she was like, "Oh yeah, my dad actually shot the student film." And so then we used a lot of it in the film. And it wasn't until this past year when we were part of the Toronto Jewish Film Festival, did a little thing for us, and programmed a couple of other short films as well in this like program, that they programmed his film, but they had to name it. And he went back to his like notebook, I guess. He kept a notebook, and I guess it had his like resume or something back then to find the name that they gave it. And he gave it the exact same name that I gave it, but back in 1975, and he didn't remember he gave it the name of There's No Place Like This Place, Any Place. So he made the joke that, you know, like I had taken the name, so for this program that we were both in, like mine was There's No Place Like This Place, Any Place, and then he had to come up with a different name for it. But I was just like, what a crazy like thing of coincidence that, you know, her dad made this film for like, you know, film school in the 70s, and then I made this film and used that film, and we had the same title but didn't even realize it, kind of thing.
But sort of things like the turkey line, when they hand out the turkeys, at Christmas, and then and West Bank doing the sort of the same thing. Was that planned by West Bank? Was that such a big thing, like at Honest Ed's, that they said, "Oh, we're going to continue doing that," or was it just the publicity stunt?
I'm not totally sure. It is funny because when Honest Ed's closed and they stopped doing because they closed, right away, this other place that's like a realtor company, that's like a family-owned realtor company up the street, they started doing it. And they had done it, I think, for at least a year or two. And then West Bank came in and was like, we're going to do one too. And they scheduled it for the first time I think they did it, they scheduled it for the exact same day, just slightly later in time. And I found that to be strange and interesting at the same time. And that archival footage is actually from like the CBC archives. We pulled from the CBC archives for our film as well. And I do have a funny story about archival footage when it comes to finding archival footage of like the Black community from like the 70s and 80s. It was very difficult because I think a lot of times, different sort of marginalized groups don't get their history recorded and filmed. And so that was like hard to sort of dig through and find that archive. And I found it by going through, there used to be like this Black owned newspaper called Contrast Magazine for years. That was around the corner from a different book list. And so I've sat in like the microfilm and like literally tried to scan through to find anything mentioning like a film or some sort of thing. And I found a film. I had to go to like this university to get the 16 mil. We had to go find the person who now I think lives in like Barbados or something, to give us permission to use it. And then we scanned it. And then we only used a short clip of it. But Aita, when she watched the film, she was like, oh my gosh, I know that woman. Like, well, I grew up and like, she was like the friend of my mom or something. And so it was just so special that it was so hard to find this archive, but it actually like people recognized people from it. So I thought that was so cool. And then we had another piece that was from the CBC, but I just think it's so important to sort of preserve the histories of people who are normally marginalized and don't get to tell their history. And so I'm also just really happy I get to help Aita tell her story.
Mm-hmm. What I found very, very interesting with the shots with the lines for the turkeys was that basically you could, although there was like, I don't know, 50 years in between them, they were quite identical. There were still people maybe with an immigrant background. There was still like the poorer communities. They were still extremely thankful of receiving this gift, basically, and that's what struck me while watching that. Like sort of the comparison of that nothing really has changed.
Yeah, and it was kind of a really cool tradition that happened for so many years that Honest Ed's carried out. And I mean, it wasn't in the film, but I met a security guard who was picking up a turkey, and he had worked at Honest Ed's, I think, for like 17 years as a security guard. And he was like, normally I'd be on the other side of the line, but he was like, it's nice to get to like come back. And I mean, I didn't explore that aspect of it, but a lot of people like Franca, she was there for so many years. She worked for, I think, Ed when she was like 16 and just kept, and she's still working for the family. And so I know, like, I think a lot of people who worked there who eventually, all lost their jobs. They all had like a really good bond and all worked together for so many years.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there is still a sense of community in the area now, or is that sort of disappearing quite rapidly with the development going on?
Well, I mean, I guess like the development is a very large block, and so there's currently like nothing really in that block because they're still redeveloping it. I mean, a different booklist is still across the street. They haven't moved yet. And the one holdout building, that's the one beside my building, it still exists. It's still there. I know one of the people who lives in it. So I actually made a fun music video for the person who, the closing credit song that was like written by this Canadian musician. And he had written it already. It was done. And he contacted me and I was like, oh my gosh, it's a perfect song. And he wrote it about all this. And we had like never met before. And so we went and filmed part of the music video on that holdout building. But they're just like there, and it's just like a big sort of like, they're just like a tiny little island in all of that. But yeah, I don't think there's nothing really happening there. And obviously with the pandemic, I think a lot of stores have closed down because, can't afford the rent. And I think another problem in Toronto, I don't know what it's like in Germany, but there's no rent control on commercial rent. So, so many businesses have to close because they can't afford like the new lease kind of thing.
It's similar in Germany, and Munich especially is extremely expensive. And unfortunately getting more and more expensive every year. I was actually quite scared by the basically the models of having the two tiny little like houses and having this huge high-rise. And I was just thinking, if I was still sort of holding on and living there, and if I'm on my deck at the back, I have like 1,000 people looking at me on my deck. So I was quite sort of amazed that the one guy hadn't sold. Yeah. Does he still live there, or is it just sort of while the development is going on, it's still sort of empty?
So he's essentially a landlord. Like he owns the building, but he's never lived there. Okay. He rents it down to like this place called Alternative Thinking. Store below, and then I think there's a bunch of apartments above there. And I think, it's been a while, but I think it's the same people who still live there. Like I had a neighbor, and then there's another woman too who lived there. And so, yeah, I'm not totally sure what it would be like to be sort of living in all of that. And I think Kathleen I always ask her, like if they haven't sold and we were still there, like, would you want to live through all of that? And she was like, no, kind of thing, which is understandable, kind of thing.
Yeah, you see these images sometimes from China where one person hasn't sold their building, and then this huge highway is sort of being diverted around the building and stuff like that, and sort of felt a little bit like that. So you have like this sort of, I don't know, it's the lonesome cowboy sort of still surrounded by enemy buildings, I guess. Vincent, have we got any more questions?
Yes, we do. We have one question. Did you ever consider to move to another part of Toronto or to another city?
I don't think I considered moving to another city. And I think, I talk about it a bit at the end of the film, like, I'm a queer person of color. There's obviously I can move somewhere where maybe rent is cheaper, but would I feel comfortable living there and living the lifestyle I want to live? Probably not. I work in film and I shoot for other people's projects. So would I be able to do my job in another city? Like, probably not really. And so I feel like I really am tied to living in Toronto. Like if I were to pick anywhere in Canada that I would want to live in, it would be Toronto. And yeah, it just sucks that, it's really expensive to live here. And during the pandemic, we're constantly questioning why we live here, because it's expensive, the apartments are smaller, and we can't enjoy all the things we would normally be enjoying because of the pandemic. And I'm not sure what it's like for you guys there now, but like in Ontario and Toronto, we're like in another lockdown. And so we're all just like, can't get a haircut, which is why my hair is like this. But yeah, you know, would want to live somewhere I could afford, but I still want to live the life that I want to live and be able to work in my industry. And yeah, I think we like the area we live in now. It's not too far from where we used to live. And I think, you know, I'm sure in every city there's a divide between like the west end of town and the east end of town. And I was like, oh, that's funny to make of their journey. But anyway, so we like to live in the West End, and so we're like, you know, staying in the West End. But I think over the pandemic, we've like kind of been heading towards like in the East End to check out like some parks and like other sort of things. I'm like, oh, it's like nice and quaint and nice out here. But overall, it's very unaffordable to live here.
Do you think with rising rents and property being so expensive that it's sort of killing off the sort of creative industries? Because like you sort of the thing you said, you like living in Toronto as a person of color, but also you're in the arts, you're working in the arts, and the arts basically need cheap space or cheap spaces where artists can work, and that's what makes all these big cities attractive. Do you think that's sort of on a downward slope at the moment in Toronto, or are there still pockets that are cheap where you can sort of survive with little money?
I'm sure there are places like, I mean, I guess when I talk about Toronto, I talk about a very specific small part of Toronto. Like if you go further north or east or west, there are neighborhoods that are cheaper and they're pretty far away from the downtown. And so I don't feel like I would want to like move out there. But there's like so many places that used to have artist lofts and artist studios that have all been, are in the process of being redeveloped. Like a few blocks away from here, there was this amazing like studio, like live space kind of thing. And I had friends who had a place there, and it was like the big glass, like sort of like wood beamed old brick loft sort of thing. And they kicked everyone out and made it so no one would live there, but kept it as studios in the meantime while they are getting, I think, zoning for redevelopment. And I know there's some like artists, like I think there's like one thing called Akimbo that, or not, there's something here that they take over a building while the building sits there empty before redevelopment and tries to create, I guess, art spaces or whatever. But that's so temporary. I feel like there's no real solution happening right now. And I think one of the artists I talked to that didn't make it in the film, they're talking about how all their art was actually shrinking because they couldn't make bigger pieces anymore. Because it's like, if you're just going to work out of your home, you're making like smaller and smaller scale stuff because you don't have the space anymore.
Okay. Vincent?
Yes.
Any more?
Yes, we have here a question. What was the best thing you have learned during the filmmaking progress?
Wow, best thing I've learned. Well, this was like my first feature documentary, and pretty much like my first documentary that I did in a very like proper way, where we like got real funding and then we got to do everything in a pretty like formal, proper way. And so I learned like so many things about filmmaking. What's the best thing I learned? I mean, one thing I think I need to keep reminding myself is to not fear rejection, because it's nice that the film has actually done well since it's come out, but the amount of rejection that I think we got, or I got, while trying to make the film was quite a bit. And even now, I think we're having a hard time finding like American or international distribution, because I think when people hear Toronto and Canada, they're like, oh, you know, like it's not international enough. But I'm like, no, there's stories in here that are very universal that, you know, I'm sure in every city there's probably something like Honest Ed's that will remind you of that, and gentrification is happening everywhere. But yeah, I mean, I guess the rejection thing was a thing to learn to overcome, because we did end up getting that funding, and also I guess just learning a lot about, you know, the process that happens after you make the film is another job almost. And it was just like really amazing getting to spend so long in the edit and having that time to sort of go through like so many hours of footage, years worth of footage, and sort of like figure out how to create and craft that story.
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the editing, because I'm sure, because you filmed over the course of a few years, I'm sure you had a lot of material. How was the process? Like, did you start editing while still shooting, or did you edit at the end? What was the process like?
I think when I first started just filming, I was just filming, and I think even through a few years of it, I was just kind of like filming things that were happening because it was such an in the moment thing. It was literally like the story was unfolding in front of me, and I felt like I had to capture every part of it and really had to figure out how to tell it. And so I think a lot of how I was going to tell it and really narrow in on the story came down in the edit. And we did do some shooting while we were kind of editing as well to get some last pieces. And also because the announcement that was included in the film, I think that announcement was like end of January, and then our film like came out, beginning of May kind of thing. So I was adding little bits and pieces, up until the end, and I'm glad we had a deadline, because I constantly feel like I could just keep filming what's happening there and want to film more. But I think just like getting to work with a really experienced, amazing editor who was really great, and getting to learn from her on, better storytelling. And we always used to joke like, what is a scene? And also trying to figure out how to like craft scenes. And I think before, maybe when I was like more green, I was like, you know what, it's fine. I'm just going to go into it and shoot all this stuff, because filming is my background. But now I'm like, okay, obviously you want to write it out a lot more, but I think it's also really amazing that in documentary, you get this freedom to just meet people and sort of like make connections. Because in the end, at least for this story, everything was so intertwined and a lot of coincidences happened. And I think without those, certain things wouldn't have happened. And so I'm really happy that I just like almost went with the flow in a way. And I think a lot of those intimate, emotional moments came out because of that.
I love the scene, by the way, of the Portuguese guy when they're tearing down Honest Jon's. I loved him. He was just sort of a gift to the film, I guess.
Yeah, Brandon. It's funny because I got obsessed with filming the demolition, and I couldn't figure out why. It was just like weirdly, like it was really sad but beautiful at the same time. Like it felt like a choreographed dance, and like things were always happening, and just visually, and so I got obsessed with filming it. So I was working a full-time job, and I just went into work late for like, a couple of weeks when they were really tearing it down. And so every day I'd go really early, and I would just like go film, and eventually, I'd sort of like talk to these construction workers, and they got to like know me. And then I would just go, and they would just tell me what was happening. And like Brandon was super nice, and he would just like, be like, hey, like we're gonna go do this, and then like explain how they did stuff. And it was just like really nice, and it was interesting to hear their point of view, because like people were really upset that this was happening, and I think they were being blamed because they were doing the actual demolition, but they were hired obviously, and so they were just doing their job. And so it was just interesting to to talk to them and get to know them. And it was just like a, you know, kind of nutty process to see a building get taken apart.
How long did it actually take for them to demolish that whole block, or like the Honest Ed's block?
I'd say, I feel like it took a long, I don't know if it took a long time, but it felt like it took months. Definitely they would do it in like, I think fast chunks, or you'd see more at certain times, but when they were sawing that sign off, it took a long time. And then on one side, they just clawed it down. And it's actually funny because I have a giant piece of the sign in my home. Have like a piece that it must be at least like 4 feet by, I don't know, probably 4 feet. It's very large, like just shard of metal with like some broken glass and bulbs and stuff. That I was like, oh yeah, one day I'm gonna figure out how to fix this and make it work. But yeah, it definitely took a while, I think, just to do it like safely and all that stuff.
And do you think, like in that instance, because you were alone and maybe because you are a woman, you had sort of, I don't know, you were more unassuming than like arriving there with a big team, and that helped you sort of engage with the workers?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of like the beginning stages for a long time before we got funding, I was just going with cameras that I could like borrow, or like I was renting a camera for work and then just would bring it to my home and start filming. And I feel like people were probably like, oh, you're just making a student project or something like that. But yeah, everyone was actually generally really open to talking with me.
Cool. Vincent, are there any other questions?
Yes, we have here a question. Where did you find the archive footage from Honest Ed?
So where did you find the archive footage? I think we talked about that before, but maybe like in two short sentences.
My producer's dad did a student film in 1975, which I didn't know about, and then we used that, which was amazing. And then we went through the CBC archives, like the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's archives, our national broadcaster.
Any more questions?
Yes. Will it be in the cinemas later, or where can you find the movie later?
Okay. So is there going to be a theatrical release of the film?
Well, we have a distributor. Kino Smith is our distributor, and so I'm hoping that, you know, we'll get into theaters. But currently, right now in Canada, I'm so thankful I just got my first dose of the vaccine, but it's like we're being made to wait like 4 months until our next dose. So I feel like it probably will be a while before everyone's vaccinated, and I'm not totally sure when they're going to open the cinemas. But a funny story is our film was actually supposed to, when the Bloor Hot Doc Cinema, where Hot Docs shows all the films, when it was supposed to reopen last October, after, you know, being closed for part of the pandemic, we were supposed to be the film that opened for, you know, like however long of a run. And then I think a few weeks before it was supposed to open, the government was like, no, we're shutting it all down again. So I was like, no, I wanted that so bad. But I really want to see it in a theater with an audience just to see the reactions. But most of all, like I want Gabor and like Aita to be able to get on stage and like, you know, see this audience of people and like get their Q&A and, you know, get that sort of recognition, because I think, you know, they have such beautiful stories, and I want them to be able to like feel the audience's reaction from that.
Anyone else?
We have a last question here. Was it easy to finance the project? You talked about a funding, right? So was it easy for you, or did you have any difficulties?
I mean, I had to pitch it quite a bunch of times, but I was really lucky in that a talent lab here, part of a different film festival, the Real World Film Festival, they had this thing. It was like the first year of the Telefilm Talent to Watch fund, and they had to just sort of jig the system. And they were going to fund 50 projects that year. And I think most times people think of it as like a narrative film fund, but they actually do fund some docs. And I was quite lucky that my film got put forward by this festival. Like I applied through this festival and they put it forward. And my film was one of the 50 that got picked to be funded that year. And the Telefilm Talent to Watch was $125,000. So that was like really helpful in getting it. And after I got that one, I applied for other grants, which I got. And then in the end, we got a CBC broadcast license. And so that helped us finish, make the rest of the film, but also we were able to do a 1-hour TV version because of that.
And has that been screened, the 1-hour version?
Yeah, so it played last fall in across Canada in October. It's supposed to sort of be in conjunction with the cinema sort of opening. Yeah, so it played, and I think it's been re-aired a few times maybe, and it's on CBC Gem, which is like their online streaming platform in Canada. And yeah, so it's been nice because people have been able to watch the film in different ways.
And did you have like reactions after the broadcast?
Yeah, I had people just like send us emails or like message us. And it's funny because people I meet sometimes now are like, oh yeah, like you made that film and like I watched it. And then they have really nice things to say about it. So that's like really nice to hear, because I'm just like, oh, like I don't know you, but now you've looked weirdly into my life because, you know, I'm in the film with like my partner, and so that's always a funny, weird thing. But it's just really nice to get to hear people's feedback, because I can't watch it in the theater with anyone.
You use quite a bit of animation in the film to sort of clarify facts, to show actually how big is the development going to be and how high. When did that idea come about, and how did you then implement it? Was that right at the end, or?
I think I was always like fascinated by development models and like sort of like the renderings that developers do. And I think I really wanted to try and do something just to show the scale of it. Because I'm like, it's one thing to be like, this is going to go, a 26-story building is going to go here. And then it's another thing to visually get to see what that looks like. And I always knew I wanted to convey a lot of information in the film, and I didn't want it to have too many text cards. And I mean, in the end, there is quite a bit of text, but I was hoping to have more motion graphics or sort of infographics to convey all that. But I think earlier on, I sort of knew I wanted that. And then, you know, towards the end, when we were in post, we worked on all of that.
The professor, sort of the urban planning professor you have in your film, when did she come into it? Because she sort of, she explains quite a lot, but is quite fantastic in the way she talks about like development and gentrification. Was that someone you met quite early, or was that also something that sort of you realized, oh, we need someone to sort of categorize this for us?
I think that I had always wanted to find someone, and we were always searching for someone who'd be able to talk more about the urban planning sort of side of it, because that's something I became really passionate about and interested in while making this film, and I needed someone to sort of like talk about, you know, the other side of all of this. And so like I started talking to Deb, and she's just so engaging and just so good at speaking that I was like, I just want to listen to you, and so knowledgeable. And it was really cool because, you know, we filmed one of her classes, and so like I got to see her like teaching her class, and I was like, I want to take this class. But I think that was really important, and really, you know, one of the last things that I show in the film is that government announcement, which I think really ties it together, in that I was trying to really say, you know, this is a political issue, and we need all layers of sort of government to sort of work together. And it's like, it's more than just a developer thing. It's like a systemic issue that needs to be like worked on. And so I'm really happy that she was able to break down what those numbers meant, because I think it was very confusing when that announcement made, because you're like, oh, this is getting so much money for affordable housing. And then you're like, oh, wait, but if you're basing it on this, then actually it's this, which is not that affordable. And I almost didn't go film that announcement. It's just because I had been filming there one day, and I think one of the construction workers are like, are you coming back to film like tomorrow? And I was like, what's tomorrow? And then I actually like emailed them, and they're like, oh, it's just like, you know, some, you know, a loner talking about something. Like, they were like, it's nothing. And then I went to ITA and I was like, are you gonna go to this thing? Should I go to this thing? And then she was like, oh, I think I got an email. And then I looked at the email and I was like, oh, I think it's like a big thing, because I think like the federal government is making an announcement. So then I went back and we filmed it. And I think that was like a really important piece that I'm glad I got. And I think that just speaks to like how everything was kind of just unfolding.
Vincent, we have time for one more question. Have you got something for us?
So, yes, we have one more question here. So, the Honest Ads sign has such a retro charm. Do you know why they never modernize it, or never did modernize it, or do you know anything about that sign? Has it a story, or is it?
So I think the sign was actually put in the 80s, and I don't know if you can tell, like some of the archival footage or photos we use, like there's always been kind of some sort of like wacky, fun sort of exterior on it. And I know talking to Franca about Ed, like he really liked carnival themed things, and he wanted to make shopping like an experience. So I think part of the shtick was to make something really flashy, but I know that when the sign first got installed, like people complained about the flashing lights because they thought it was too like gaudy and bright kind of thing. And I know that they saved one of the signs, like the Mirvishes did, and I think they're restoring it. But I think that he just like really liked that style. And I think another anecdote to sort of explain what Honest Ads was when the construction workers were tearing it down, they found they actually had multiple floors. Like if the floor was like, I think something wrong with it, they would just put another floor on top and then like another floor on top. And so it just was a place that was like kind of falling apart, but still stuck together kind of thing. And I think he had all these fun headlines, and one of them was about their crooked floors kind of thing. It was just like he was a funny guy with like all these different, I think, ideas, which were cool.
And I guess the question that everybody sort of asks themselves at the end of the film, what does it look like now? Like, what's the situation like now, and when will it open?
I mean, in the film, I put that it was supposed to open, I think, August of this year, because originally on the hoarding, it said like the dates. I think maybe next year is when it's supposed to be done. It's up there. Like, if you guys watch the film, I do the intro standing on the block to try and show. And if you want to follow us like on our social media, there's no place like this place. I think we posted some photos of what it looks like now, but like on one side, the towers are there, and I think they're just like building up, and I'm not sure what's happening with the rest of it. But yeah, it's definitely happening. I think one thing which I think is really cool is that, you know, this is like its first European sort of screening and premiere. Like, it's never played outside of North America, and I just find it so awesome that you guys programmed it, because I just am happy that maybe it's resonating outside of North America. And it's just like, I'm just curious, like what you guys thought, and if you guys have like an Honest Ads in Munich or whatnot.
So, dear audience, if you have any more questions, you can ask them on our website. There is like a little link or a little button called Post ans Filmteam, so like post for the film team. Click on that, and then you can send a message to Lulu Wei. Lulu, thank you very, very much for being with us and answering our questions. Do you have any other film tips for the festival?
Well, there's one other film by local Toronto filmmakers who made a really amazing film about the Calgary police, and you should definitely check it out. And the title of it is, I keep thinking about the CBC title, so I'll let you take that one.
I don't know it off by heart, I'm afraid. What's the CBC title?
The CBC title is Above the Law, but I'm like, that is not the title of it.
Okay,
but,
I'm sorry, I haven't watched all the films
Bob and
yet.
Mark's film, you should go check that one out.
Okay, okay. You can vote for There's No Place Like This Place, Any Place, for our Audience Award, sponsored by BR and Dreisat. So just go to our homepage, to the film page, and you can vote for it, for the Kino Audience Award. And you have the chance to watch There's No Place Like This Place, Any Place until the 23rd of May. Thank you for being with us. Lulu, thank you for being with us, and hopefully see you next time with your next film in Munich in the theatre.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was there right now, but thank you so much for having me in the festival, and I hope that you all enjoy the film.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.